Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new JID album, God Does Like Ugly. God Does Like Ugly is the fourth album from the American rapper JID, who really made a name for himself a few years ago back in 2022 with his absolutely fantastic album, The Forever Story, which is an album that, for his standards at the time, was really quite like nothing he'd ever done before. Just everything about the album, whether that's the production, the rapping, the lyrics, everything, was all just completely on another level compared to what he'd done in the past, making this an absolutely landmark record not only for JID's career, but just for modern hip hop in general, being easily one of the most beloved hip hop albums of the last 5 years, and rightfully so, with it easily being a favourite of mine too in recent memory. And so, following up an album like The Forever Story is, of course, never going to be an easy task, especially for an artist like JID, who doesn't really have all that much experience making albums of such an incredible quality, given that as much as I, of course, love The Forever Story, the two albums before it, while perfectly good, are just not quite on the same level. But luckily, God Does Like Ugly does manage to come through and confirm that JID was more than just a one great album wonder, being, of course, not quite as theatrical and conceptual as The Forever Story, but overall just being a solid, very straightforward hip-hop album with lots of great production and rapping. I think that the opening song on this album, You Ugly, is a bit of a strange one, having this very harsh and abrupt opening few seconds without much sense of flow or trying to have a proper introduction. But as odd as the beginning of this track is, once it really gets going, it does manage to get a lot better. I do like JID's commentary on this track about fans who seem to just care too much about the charting positions of songs, and in general, this idea of fans caring too much is something that does make a few more appearances on the album as well, most notably on the closing track too. I also absolutely love a lot of the much more soul-influenced moments on this track, and just in general, the sort of sections in a way that it's split up into, I think just all fit together really well. And to be honest, I think that without those opening few seconds, this would have been just about the best introduction that this album could have had. Glory is simply pretty much just everything you would want out of a neo-soul or modern hip-hop kind of track. I am definitely a fan of the much more progressive approach to the rapping, giving it this sense of suspense, which I really like, as well as the choir-like chants in the background also being one of my favorite things about it. I think the work, for the most part, is just a pretty generic and somewhat repetitive track as well. I think there is somewhat of an attempt to create some suspense in this song, which I think does add a little bit to the atmosphere, which is good. However, I just find that that sense of suspense that it's trying to make isn't reflected in enough elements of the song, only really in the instrumental, and just isn't felt at all in the rapping, which does just kind of cause it to not have as much of an effect as I think it could have done. I do think that JID's rapping is still absolutely on point in this track, showcasing that he's still incredibly talented even when the overall song isn't as good, but I do just find the song on the whole to just be a bit too repetitive for my liking. Community, on the complete other end of things, I think is absolutely one of my favourite songs on the album, especially with that incredible clips feature, with obviously both Pusha T and Malice carrying a lot of weight and showcasing how talented they are as vocalists and rappers, and of course JID himself still also having some incredible moments on this song. I do like how the instrumental takes a bit more of a backseat on this track. It's still just present enough to provide this nice atmosphere, but on the whole I just love how it leaves a lot more room for three incredible rappers to really show off how talented they are. JZ then continues with the more sparse instrumental, and despite having no featured artists on this track to fill a lot of that empty space in the same way that Pusha and Malice do on Community, I think that just JID himself does an incredible job at filling that gap, just consistently with absolutely incredible flow in his rapping, and just manages to keep it interesting for the whole song. VCRs has absolutely some of my favourite production on the album, definitely being some of the most unique as well. And I also do really like JID's much more low-key approach to the rapping on this song, obviously with there being so much more passion and expression on other tracks, but sometimes it is just nice to hear something a little bit simpler like this one. I think that Skate, simply put, is just an incredibly fun track. I think that there is particularly good flow in the rapping, as well as just some of the funkiest and coolest beats on the album too. Very dynamic arrangement of vocals I think is also really good, with lots of different featured artists that just make this song one of the most fun and groovy cuts from the project. What We On is a song that does stick out, and unfortunately not for good reasons. Just for starters, you have this weird kind of reversed effect on the beats, which is I think is just completely unnecessary, as well as these also really strange sound effects that have been put on the vocals, which again just feels like a completely pointless addition, and I really don't see what the vision here was. I do still quite like JID's verse on this track, again with him just obviously being such an incredible rapper, does manage to carry the song quite a bit. There is this trap beat during his verse, which while I think is not a style I'm generally that fond of, compared to everything else on the song, it does actually work quite well. I absolutely love the very very soft piano on Wholeheartedly, which consistently remains one of my favourite things about the song, with many of the other highlights from this track just mostly being in the instrumental for me, with there just being so many moments where any particular instrument is doing something interesting. Whether that's the bass or the amazing string arrangements, I think that everything in this song just manages to come together to create something quite incredible, despite the song as a whole still overall being quite simple. Nobu does have some pretty cool production with overall quite an airy and spacey kind of sound, especially with how the effects sound on the background vocals, although I still think in some ways that this track is maybe just a bit too simple for my liking, especially with the last run of few tracks on the album being quite minimalist on the whole, which obviously is nice to have a few moments like this on an album that's nearly an hour long. However, at this point I think it would just be nice to have a bit of a break from that style, which luckily is something that On McAfee does then provide, being overall quite a sudden sound change from the very lush and soft production of the previous run of songs, going into a much more harsh sound, which despite that I think actually works really well and is exactly what was needed in this moment. And I think overall it's just so refreshing to have a song like this after the previous run of tracks, with just the much more aggressive approach to just about everything on the song being exactly what I wanted to hear at this point in the album. Of Blue, I think, has absolutely one of the best features on the whole album, with Mariba singing the entire intro of the song and doing an absolutely incredible job, showing off her incredible voice as well as just a really nice and soft acoustic guitar for the whole intro, which despite how simple and in a way sparsely it's used, it still adds so much to the atmosphere. And then of course the rest of the song, simply put, is just great. Good rapping, good production, good everything really. The thing I think that the song K-Word does best is just its ability to build tension. There's this amazing suspense that's being built for pretty much the whole song, especially just in the way that the instrumental sounds, given that I'm not a huge fan of the rapping on this one, with I think the vocal delivery still being incredible for the most part, but overall I just find that this kind of style doesn't really match what JID is typically good at. And then the closing track for Keeps takes a much more light-hearted approach to finish the album, and overall I just love the production on this track, as well as how it's just a cool little ode to JID's career and how far he's come since the beginning. And so while this album isn't as epic and as big and as grand as the Forever Story, I think that sometimes just a solid collection of songs is exactly what an artist needs to put out. And I think that especially at this point in JID's career, having just come off of releasing such an incredible album, that something a bit more low-key is exactly what he needed to do. And so while I think there are still a handful of songs that maybe could have been cut from the tracklist of this one, overall I'm definitely a fan of this direction he's taking, and I absolutely think that on future projects a lot more could be made out of this sound, and which is why I'm going to be giving this album a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.